At Ravenswood Manor, the night was elegant, the guests refined, the silence almost too perfect. But when a body is discovered in the grand library, the facade of charm begins to crack. And only Hercule Poirot knows. Within these polished walls lies not just history, but murder. The morning discovery. It was a crisp autumn morning in 1930 when I found myself once again drawn into the orbit of my extraordinary friend Poirot. We were summoned to Street Merryme, that quaint English village of rolling hills and whispered secrets, by a telephone call from Mr. Charles Vane, a solicitor, whose name carried a certain weight. In legal circles, the urgency in his voice had been unmistakable. A murder at Ravenswood Hall, the grand estate of Sir Henry Ashwood, demanded Poirot's unparalleled genius. Our journey from London was a pleasant one, the motorcar humming through lanes framed by trees ablaze with gold and crimson. I remarked to Poirot on the beauty of the countryside, expecting a light-hearted quip, but he merely adjusted his hat and murmured, "I'll mourn me, the countryside may be peaceful, but the human heart it is never at rest." His wry observation hung in the air as we approached our destination. Ravenswood Hall rose before us, like a monument to Victorian splendor. Its ivy-clad walls stretched upward, embracing tall windows that gleamed in the morning light. The stonework was ornate, a testament to wealth and prestige, yet the sprawling gardens and gravel path seemed hushed, as though the estate held its breath. I felt a shiver, not entirely from the chill air. As we stepped from the car, Mr. Charles Vane met us at the door, a tall man with a furrowed brow and a handshake that betrayed his agitation. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, I cannot thank you enough for coming so swiftly," he said. "The situation is dire. Sir Henry Ashwood is dead, and suspicion falls upon his wife, Lady Margaret. I am convinced of her innocence, but the evidence, it is troubling." Before Poirot could respond, Vane ushered us into the drawing-room, refined space of velvet curtains and bronze ornaments, where the household had gathered in uneasy silence. He turned to the group and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mr. Hercule Poirot, the renowned detective, and his associate, Captain Hastings. They are here to uncover the truth behind Sir Henry's tragic death." The introductions were brief but necessary. Lady Margaret Ashwood, a woman of striking beauty in her maidens, sat near the fireplace, her dark hair impeccably styled, yet her face pale with distress. Beside her was Miss Clara Beaumont, her cousin, older by a few years, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reserved demeanor. Vane explained in a low voice, "Miss Beaumont has been staying at Ravenswood Hall as a companion to Lady Margaret since her marriage to Sir Henry, a long-term guest, you might say. Mr. Edward Harwell, Sir Henry's private secretary, lingered by the window, a quiet figure in his late 20s, whose methodical air was marred by a nervous twitch of his hands. And this," Vane continued, gesturing to a distinguished man in his 50s, who stood near the mantelpiece, "is Dr. Thompson, the family physician. He arrived this morning shortly after the discovery, and has already examined the body." Dr. Thompson stepped forward, his expression grave. "I'm afraid it's quite clear, Mr. Poirot. Sir Henry died of arsenic poisoning. The symptoms: convulsions, vomiting, the faint scent of almonds on his breath, and the residue in the port glass leave little doubt. I've informed the local authorities, and they've contacted Scotland Yard. An inspector is expected later today." Poirot's green eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Miss Sine, what has occurred?" Vane began his account. "It was this morning at breakfast. Sir Henry, a man of rigid habit, failed to appear at the table. Lady Margaret grew anxious, quite rightly, as it transpired, and asked Thomas Grayson, the butler, to seek him out." Lady Margaret's voice trembled as she took up the tale. "I knew something was wrong. Henry never missed breakfast. Without a word, I begged Thomas to check the library. He often worked there late into the night." "And what did Mr. Grayson find?" P.U. inquired, his tone gentle yet probing. Vane hesitated. "Grayson discovered the library door locked. He knocked, received no reply, and searched for the spare key after checking the hall cupboard, where the second key was usually kept, and finding it missing, he eventually located it in the vase by the hearth, an unusual place for it to be. Inside, he found Sir Henry slumped over his desk, lifeless, an empty glass of port beside him. The key was found in Sir Henry's pocket, suggesting the door had been locked from the inside." A gasp escaped Lady Margaret, and Miss Clara's hand tightened on her cousin's arm. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign I knew that his little gray cells were stirring. "There's more," Vane continued, his voice low. He glanced at Lady Margaret, then at Poirot, and suggested, "Perhaps we should discuss this in private." Poirot nodded, and we followed Vane to a small study adjacent to the drawing room. Once the door was closed, Vane spoke freely. Lady Margaret had recently purchased arsenic, claiming it was for rats in the cellar. The servants Thomas Grayson and Mrs. Ellen Cook, the cook, confirmed this, but their whispers have turned it into something sinister. I find it highly improbable, Mr. Poirot. Lady Margaret adored Sir Henry. Her affection was plain to see. Poirot inclined his head. Then let us proceed with care. I shall speak with this Mrs. Cook, but first I must see the library. We followed Vane through the spacious halls, their gas fixtures casting flickering shadows on the carpeted staircase. The library was a grand chamber, its oak desk and leather chairs dwarfed by towering bookshelves. A chandelier gleamed overhead, but the air carried a faint bitter scent that set my nerves on edge. Sir Henry's body had been removed by the local authorities, as Dr. Thompson had arranged, but the scene remained untouched. Papers scattered across the desk, an empty port glass glinting in the light, and a curious smudge marring the polished wood. Poirot examined the room with his usual meticulous care. He lifted the glass, sniffed it delicately, and set it down with a murmur of interest. Then he turned to the door, testing the lock, and the spare key. Vane had mentioned the door was locked from the inside. Vane repeated. Grayson found the key in Sir Henry's pocket. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A locked room, a puzzle most delightful, yet the murderer did not vanish into thin air, did they, Hastings? I venture to guess. Could he have taken his own life? Poirot, he shook his head, his tone firm. No monotony, the absence of a note. The position of the body, as you described it. Sure. Vane slumped over the desk, as if caught unaware. And the arsenic, these are the marks of murder, not despair. But do not fret, the truth will reveal itself to Hercule Poirot. Poirot turned to me as we left the library, lowering his voice. But Hastings, did you notice something curious? Grayson said he found the spare key in the vase by the hearth outside the library after it was missing from the hall cupboard. If the room was truly locked from inside, why would the spare key be displaced at all? This suggests the room was not locked from within as it appears, but rather manipulated from without. A clever ruse, but one that leaves a most telling sign for those who observe carefully. Back in the drawing room, Poirot addressed the group. Madame Zissou, I promise you this, the mystery of Sir Henry Ashwood's death shall be solved. I ask only for your patience and your candor. Lady Margaret nodded faintly, while Miss Clara's gaze lingered on Poirot, as though weighing his words. Mr. Harwell said nothing, his fingers twisting together. I felt the weight of their secrets pressing in, and as Poirot began his investigation, I knew we stood on the threshold of a tangled web, one that only his little gray cells could unravel. The Belgian detective Ravenswood Hall, with its grand Victorian opulence, was a sight to stir the heart of any man fortunate enough to cross its threshold. As Poirot and I settled into the guest quarters assigned to us, I found myself marveling at the rich intricacy of the wood-paneled walls, the heavy velvet drapes that framed the tall windows, and the gleam of brass fixtures that caught the flickering gaslight. Yet for all its splendor there hung about the place an indefinable unease, a tension that seemed to whisper through the corridors, as though the very stones of the manor were privy to some dark secret. Poirot, of course, was not one to be swayed by mere impressions. He paced our room with that familiar briskness, his sharp green eyes darting from the neatly aligned furniture to the smallest speck upon the carpet. His mustache, that proud emblem of his fastidious nature, gave a faint twitch as he paused by the window. A magnificent estate, Hastings, he observed, but even the most exquisite facade may conceal a multitude of sins. Nesper, I nodded, though my mind was still tethered to the morning's grim discovery. Sir Henry Ashwood dead, in his locked library, a glass of port his final companion. The circumstances were perplexing, and I knew well that such puzzles were the very lifeblood of my friend's existence. Our first task, Poirot declared, was to interrogate Thomas Grayson, the butler. The servants, Manami, he said with a knowing tilt of his head, they are the silent witnesses to all that transpires. We shall see what this Grayson has observed. I could not argue with his logic, for Poirot's methods, though often unorthodox, had an uncanny way of unearthing the truth. We found Grayson in the servants' hall, a man whose starched collar and rigid posture bespoke a pride bordering on the pompous. He was perhaps 40, with a face that might have been carved from oak. Unyielding and precise, Poirot greeted him with a courteous nod. Sure, Grayson, I trust you are bearing up under these tragic events. Grayson's expression remained as fixed as a statue's, as well as may be expected. Sir, it is a grievous loss to Ravenswood Hall. Quite so, Poirot replied. Now tell me, if you please, the night of Sir Henry's death, was the house secured as is your custom. A flicker of surprise crossed Grayson's eyes, swiftly masked. Indeed, sir, I locked every door and window myself. Before retiring at 10 o'clock, it is my responsibility, and I do not take it lightly, and no one could have entered or departed thereafter. Poirot pressed his gaze. Steady, none, sir. The house was sealed. The keys are kept with me, save for those Sir Henry carried, and as were found upon him in the library. Poirot's mustache gave another twitch, a sign I knew well. Then it follows, does it not, that the one who ended Sir Henry's life was already within these walls? Grayson hesitated, then inclined his head stiffly. So, it would appear, sir. While Poirot pursued his line of inquiry, I took the opportunity to slip away to the drawing-room where Miss Clara Beaumont sat alone by a window, her gaze fixed upon the mist-shrouded gardens. She was a woman of quiet dignity. Her reserved manner, cloaking a mind I suspected, was sharper than most. I had been tasked with uncovering her ties to Lady Margaret and the late Sir Henry, and I approached with a care born of respect. Miss Beaumont, I ventured, I hope I do not disturb you. She turned, offering a faint smile that softened her features. Not at all, Captain Hastings. I find myself glad of the company. I settled into a chair nearby. It must be a trying time being here amidst such sorrow. Her eyes drifted back to the window, as though I am no stranger to hardship. Margaret, Lady Margaret, that is, and I have not always been in accord. She wed Sir Henry against the family's counsel. You know, he was older, and there were whispers of his temper, yet she would not be swayed. And Sir Henry, I prompted gently. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Civil enough, but distant. He bore my presence for Margaret's sake, though I dare say he found it irksome. I have been her companion since their marriage, yet I am under no illusion. I am an outsider here. There was a measured restraint in her words, yet I sensed an undercurrent of strain, a thread I resolved to relay to Poirot. For now I left her to her thoughts, and returned to my friend, who had concluded with Grayson, and now pored over Sir Henry's will, courtesy of Mr. Charles Vane, in the study. Poirot spread the document across a desk, his fingers tracing the lines with meticulous care. It is, as one might expect, Hastings, he murmured. Lady Margaret inherits all, yet regard this letter penned but a week past hints at a revision. I peered over his shoulder at the unfinished note, which spoke of amending certain arrangements and named Miss Clara explicitly, though it trailed off into ambiguity. A motive, perhaps, Poirot mused, tapping the paper. Should Sir Henry have favored Miss Clara, it might ignite jealousy, or dread. I echoed, puzzled. Oui, mon ami, the dread of losing what one deems one's own inheritance. Jealousy, these are potent forces. We must observe our suspects closely, as Pooh contemplated the players in this grim drama. He turned his sharp mind to the servants' quarters, where whispers floated like specters in the dim light. I followed as he sought out Molly. The upstairs made a shy creature, with ears attuned to every murmur. She blushed as Poirot approached his presence, commanding yet gentle. Mademoiselle Molly, he began, his voice a velvet probe. You are the upstairs maid. Yes, you must have a keen ear for the goings-on in this house. Molly's cheeks flared crimson. Oh, sir, I try not to listen, but one can't help overhearing things. Sometimes Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark. Presses more. And what have you overheard, my dear? Has there been talk among the staff since Sir Henry's passing? She cast a nervous glance about, then leaned in slightly. I, sir, some say Lady Margaret and Miss Clara quarreled way too often, and Mr. Harwell, he's been queer, pacing and muttering to himself. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching with satisfaction most illuminating. And the night Sir Henry died, did you mark anything unusual? No, sir, she replied, her voice small. The house was quiet as it always is. I retired early, as did most of the staff. Thank you, mademoiselle, Poirot said with a courteous bow. You have aided us greatly. I marveled at his deft touch as we withdrew, rejoining him in the drawing-room, where he now stood, his eyes flitting between Lady Margaret, rigid with grief, and Miss Clara, steadfast, yet distant. Mr. Harwell stood nearby, his fingers fidgeting with the knot of his tie, betraying his inner agitation. Hero leaned close, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. The currents of this household, Hastings, they run deep and troubled. There is much yet to uncover. I felt the truth of his words settle upon me. The stage was laid, the actors assembled, and as Poirot readied himself to probe further, I knew the mystery's heart lay within his reach, awaiting the touch of his little gray cells. The official inquiry, the inquest into the untimely demise of Sir Henry Ashwood, was held in the drawing-room of Ravenswood Hall, a chamber that, for all its elegance, seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the occasion. The velvet curtains, drawn half across the tall windows, admitted a feeble light that did little to dispel the gloom, while the grand piano in the corner stood mute, its polished ebony reflecting the strained faces of the assembled company. I took my place beside Poirot, who sat with his customary precision in a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his keen eyes darting from one figure to the next with that feline alertness I knew so well. Inspector, a familiar figure to Poirot and myself, arrived to oversee the inquest. His stern countenance was tempered by years of camaraderie with Poirot, and he assumed command of the proceedings with his usual brisk authority. He stood before us all, notebook in hand, and addressed the room. "We are gathered here to establish the facts of Sir Henry Ashwood's death," he declared. "To ensure the integrity of each testimony, I will be speaking with each of you privately in the study. Please remain here until called." The household exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Japp's words settling over them. Like a pole, one by one, they would be summoned, their secrets laid bare in the solitude of the study. Away from prying ears turned to the butler. "Mr. Thomas Grayson, please accompany me." Grayson rose with his characteristic dignity and followed out of the drawing-room. Poirot and I exchanged a glance, and at Japp's nod we too rose to join them in the study, where the interviews would take place. The study was a smaller room lined with books and furnished with a sturdy desk and several chairs. It was here that the truth, or as much of it as could be coaxed from reluctant lips, would be sought. The butler advanced with a dignity that bordered on the theatrical, his starched collar and rigid bearing a testament to his unswerving devotion to duty. "It was this morning at 8 o'clock precisely," he began, his voice as steady as a metronome, "when Lady Margaret summoned me. Sir Henry had not appeared for breakfast, a most unusual occurrence, and she was in a state of considerable distress. I proceeded at once to the library, where he was wont to linger over his papers into the night. The door was locked, and my knock solicited no response. I retrieved the spare key from the hall cupboard, and with Mr. Harwell at my side, entered to find Sir Henry slumped across his desk, quite dead. An empty glass of port stood beside him, scribbled a note, his brow creasing. "The door, you say, was it locked from within?" "Indeed, sir," Grayson replied, unflinching. "The key was later found in Sir Henry's pocket by Dr. Thompson, who examined the body." "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," said. "You may return to the drawing-room." Grayson inclined his head and departed, his steps measured and deliberate. Turned to Poirot, his expression thoughtful. "A locked room, Poirot, that's your sort of puzzle, isn't it?" Pooh's mustache twitched. "Indeed, mon ami, but the solution lies not in the lock, but in the hearts of those who dwell here." Nodded and called for the next witness. "Mr. Edward Harwell, please." Mr. Harwell entered the study, his demeanor a stark contrast to Grayson's composure. His hands fidgeted incessantly with his tie, and his voice carried a tremor as he spoke. "I last saw Sir Henry at 10 last night," he said, his eyes flickering toward the floor. "He was in the library poring over some documents. I wished him good night, and retired to my room later, near midnight. I think I heard a sound, a creak, or perhaps a step. I looked into the corridor, and saw that Miss Clarara's door stood ajar, though I saw no one about." "You're certain of the hour?" Pressed, his pencil poised, as certain as one can be under such circumstances. Harwell answered, his gaze fixed on the desk before him. Nodded curtly. "Very well, Mr. Harwell, you may go." As Harwell left the study, Poirot leaned toward me, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Observe Hastings, the secretary's unease. He fears something, or someone." Summoned Mrs. Ellen Cook. Next, the cook bustled into the study, her ruddy cheeks at odds with the gravity of the moment. She twisted her apron as she spoke, her words spilling forth in a nervous torrent. "I've little enough to tell, sir, but there's Hannah, the lady's maid. You know she's vanished, as I mentioned to me at Poirot yesterday. Last I saw her she was off to Miss Clara's room after dinner, muttering about a headache. That was the last anyone saw of her, and it's not like her to go off without a word to room." Nay, the study fell silent, and I felt Poirot tense beside me, his fingers tightening imperceptibly. Hannah's disappearance was a fresh twist, one that promised to complicate matters further. Turned to the door. "Thank you, Mrs. Cook. Please send in Lady Margaret next." Lady Margaret entered the study with a grace that belied her evident turmoil, her beauty despite the strain in her eyes. "I was in my room all evening, Inspector," she said, her voice steady, yet threaded with emotion. "I retired early, as I often did, when Henry worked late. I heard nothing out of the ordinary, and I remained in my chamber until morning. When I grew alarmed at his absence, paused, his tone measured. Did you notice anything unusual in the days leading up to Sir Henry's death, Lady Margaret? She shook her head. Nothing. Inspector Henry was, as he always was, devoted to his work, perhaps a little distracted, but that was his way. Thank you, Lady Margaret said. You may return to the drawing-room. As Lady Margaret departed, turned to Poirot. She seems composed, but there's a tremor in her voice. What do you make of it, Poirot? Grief, perhaps, Poirot murmured, or the weight of secrets yet unspoken. Finally called for Miss Clara Beaumont. She entered the study with her usual reserve. Her sharp eyes, taking in every detail, drew forth a small embroidered handkerchief from his coat. This was found near Sir Henry's body, Miss Beaumont. It bears your initial C.B. Can you account for it? Miss Clara's voice, cool and precise, broke the silence that followed. It is mine, Inspector, but I have not entered the library since yesterday afternoon. Someone must have placed it there. As the interviews continued, I noticed Mr. Harwell lingering near the doorway, his eyes fixed upon Lady Margaret with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for a secretary. When she spoke, he leaned forward slightly, hanging on her every word, and when she showed distress, his hands clenched at his sides, as though he wished to comfort her, but dared not. There was something unsettling about his devotion. It went beyond professional loyalty. Japp's eyes narrowed. And you have no idea who might have done so? None, Inspector, she replied, her composure unshaken. Very well, Miss Beaumont said. That will be all for now. As Miss Clara left the study, Poirot's gaze followed her, his mind no doubt racing to untangle this. Knew not the interviews. Concluded, we returned to the drawing-room, where the household sat in uneasy silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the inquest concluded, Poirot leaned close, his voice a soft murmur in my ear. There are discrepancies, Hastings, small yet significant. The locked room, the handkerchief, the absent maid, they weave a tapestry most curious. I inclined my head. The gravity of the scene settling upon me like a shroud. The air was thick with suspicion, and as the household sat in strained silence, Grayson with his measured composure, Harwell with his nervous glances, Mrs. Cook with her anxious fidgeting, I felt the full weight of the drama unfolding before us. Poirot's little gray cells were at work, I knew, and I could only marvel at the quiet certainty with which he faced the labyrinth ahead, uncovering secrets as the afternoon wore on. The shadows lengthened across Ravenswood Hall, casting a somber pall over the estate. Yet, despite the melancholy atmosphere, there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, a conviction that Poirot's keen mind was drawing ever closer to the truth. My friend, as ever, was a study in quiet determination, his little gray cells no doubt already at work, as we prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of the household. In our initial interviews that morning, Molly, the upstairs maid, had claimed the house was quiet on the night of Sir Henry's death, mentioning nothing unusual beyond overhearing quarrels and Mr. Harwell's odd behavior. Now Poirot sought her out again, suspecting she might have withheld details in her earlier nervousness. We found Molly in the servants' hall polishing a set of silver candlesticks with a nervous energy that betrayed her unease. Poirot approached her with his customary charm, his voice soft and persuasive. Mademoiselle O'Malley, he began, we spoke this morning, and you said the house was quiet the night Sir Henry died, but I must ask you to think carefully. Did you hear anything at all, even something you thought insignificant at the time? Molly hesitated, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. Well, sir, now that you mention it, I did hear a noise late at night. It sounded like footsteps, but I couldn't say where they came from. Footsteps, you say? And what time was this? Around midnight. I think I was just falling asleep when I heard them. Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. And did you investigate these footsteps, mademoiselle? No, sir, I was too frightened. I stayed in my room and locked the door. Very wise, Poirot said, nodding approvingly. Thank you, mademoiselle. This detail is most helpful. As Molly curtsied and hurried away, Poirot turned to me, his eyes gleaming. So, Hastings, Molly heard footsteps around midnight, suggesting someone was moving about the house late at night. This is consistent with what we already know from Sir Grayson, that the house was locked, and thus the murderer must be someone within these walls. I nodded, impressed by Poirot's ability to draw out new information. Indeed, Poirot, it seems the killer was indeed an insider, Précy murmured. And now let us speak further with Miss Grayson. There's more to learn from him. I think we found the butler in his pantry meticulously arranging a tray of crystal decanters. Poirot wasted no time in broaching the subject of Sir Henry's marriage. Miss Grayson, he said, his tone casual. Tell me, was Sir Henry a happy man? Was his marriage to Lady Margaret a harmonious one? Grayson hesitated, his rigid posture stiffening further. Sir Henry was a private man, sir. He did not confide in me about his personal affairs, but you are the butler, Mr. Grayson, you see, and hear much that others do not. Was there any tension between Sir Henry and his wife? Grayson's lips pressed into a thin line. There was an argument, sir, a few days before Sir Henry's death. I overheard raised voices from the library. It seemed to be about Lady Margaret's expenditures. Sir Henry was displeased with her spending habits. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And how did Lady Margaret react to this? She was upset, so she left the library in tears. Most interesting, Poirot murmured. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. As Grayson bowed and left, Poirot turned to me. So, Hastings, there was discord in the marriage. Money is often a source of conflict, and it may have played a role in Sir Henry's demise. I agreed, noting the potential motive for Lady Margaret. It certainly casts her in a suspicious light. Poirot, perhaps, Pooh said, his tone thoughtful, but we must not be hasty. There are other threads to unravel. With that, he led the way to Lady Margaret's private sitting room, a space adorned with delicate furnishings and personal touches that spoke of her presence. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on a small writing desk in the corner. He approached it, his fingers brushing against the polished wood. Lady Margaret's desk, he murmured. Perhaps it holds secrets of its own. He examined the desk carefully, noting a small locked drawer. Interesting, he said, his eyes gleaming. And where might the key be? He scanned the room, his gaze falling on a decorative vase on a nearby shelf. The vase was slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently. With a gentle tug, Poirot lifted it, revealing a small brass key hidden beneath. Voila! Poirot exclaimed, holding up the key to the drawer. I presume. I stared in amazement. How did you know it was there? Poirot smiled, his mustache curling with satisfaction. The vase, Hastings, it was slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently, and the dust around it suggested that something had been placed beneath it. He inserted the key into the lock and opened the drawer. Inside, hidden beneath a stack of papers, was a bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon. Poirot untied the ribbon and began to read, his expression growing more serious with each page. Hastings, he called, his voice low, come and see this. I joined him, peering over his shoulder at the letters. They were love letters, passionate and heartfelt, from Mr. Charles Vane to Lady Margaret. My dearest Margaret, one began, my heart aches for you, trapped in a marriage to a man who does not appreciate your beauty and spirit. Another read, if only we could be together, free from the constraints of society and duty. Poirot's eyes met mine, his expression grave. So Lady Margaret and Mr. Vane were involved in an affair. This changes everything. I nodded, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in my mind. So Vane had a motive to want Sir Henry out of the way. Indeed, Poirot said, love and greed, powerful motivators, both. But we must not jump to conclusions. There may be more to this than meets the eye. As the day drew to a close, the shadows lengthening into evening across the estate, I couldn't help but marvel at Poirot's ability to uncover hidden truths. We retired for the night, the stage set for the next act of this intricate drama, and I knew that, with Poirot leading the way, the mystery would soon be solved. The little gray cells, the autumn morning dawned crisp and clear over Ravenswood Hall, the light filtering through the tall windows, with a promise of answers yet to come after the tumult of the inquest and the secrets unearthed the previous day. I felt a stirring of anticipation as Poirot and I resumed our investigation. My friend was already at his most alert, his sharp eyes gleaming with purpose. As we descended to the drawing room, today, Hastings, he announced, adjusting his impeccable cuffs, we shall prod the nest and see what flies out first. I must speak with Lady Margaret about those letters from MS. They are a thread that may lead us to the heart of this affair. I nodded, trusting implicitly in Poirot's instincts, though I confessed the prospect of confronting Lady Margaret with such a delicate matter filled me with unease. We found her in her private sitting room, seated by the window, with a book. She did not appear to read. Her poise was as striking as ever, yet a shadow lingered in her gaze as Poirot approached. Madam, he began, his tone gentle yet probing, forgive me for intruding upon your privacy, but in matters of such gravity, I must ask about certain letters. We discovered letters from Mr. Charles Vane. They are of a most personal nature, and I would not broach the subject if it were not essential to our inquiry. Lady Margaret's composure faltered, her fingers tightening on the book spine. Those letters, she said, her voice measured yet tinged with reluctance, are relics of a distant past written before I ever met Henry. They are of no consequence now, surely." Poirot inclined his head, his voice softening further, as if to coax rather than demand. "Yet, madam, they were preserved with such care, hidden away in your desk. Might there be a reason, beyond mere sentiment, that you kept them close?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window before returning to him. "Sentiment, perhaps a foolish whim from a younger self, but I assure you, Mr. Poirot, they bear no relation to Henry's death." "Very well," Poirot replied, his tone courteous, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "We shall leave it there for the moment. Mercy, madam, for your candor." As we withdrew from Lady Margaret's sitting-room, Poirot murmured to me in a low voice, "Most curious, Hastings, the dates upon those letters. They tell a different story than the one madam would have us believe. They are not relics of a distant past, but rather recent correspondence written during her marriage to Sir Henry. Yet I prefer not to press too hard upon this deception just yet. Sometimes, mon ami, it is wiser to allow the guilty to believe their lies have been accepted. In time the truth will surface of its own accord, and when it does, it will be all the more damning for having been concealed. Our next quarry was Miss Clara Beaumont, whom we found in the conservatory, tending a cluster of delicate orchids. Her calm demeanor struck me anew, and I felt a growing warmth toward her, an instinct that she was not the villain of this piece. Poirot, however, was all business. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his tone conversational, "you have been most helpful thus far. Might I ask about your interactions with Mr. Harwell? I understand he has been of assistance to you in certain matters." Miss Clara set down her shears, meeting his gaze with unwavering clarity. "Indeed, Mr. Poirot, Mr. Harwell was kind enough to instruct me in the use of a pistol, a skill I sought for my own protection. Living in so large a house, one hears tales of intruders, and I thought it prudent to learn. He obliged me, though I dare say it surprised him to find me such an eager pupil." Poirot's brow arched faintly, his curiosity piqued. "A wise precaution, mademoiselle. And was there any particular incident that prompted this decision?" "None specific," she replied, her tone even merely a general sense of caution. "But I assure you it has not to do with Henry's poisoning." I found myself nodding inwardly, her explanation ringing true. As we left the conservatory, I ventured, "She seems genuine, Poirot. I can't believe her capable of murder." During our conversation, I had observed Mr. Harwell through the window, pacing the garden paths with agitated steps. When Lady Margaret appeared at her sitting-room window, he stopped abruptly and stared up at her with such longing that it made me uncomfortable. When she withdrew from view, his shoulders sagged as though the light had gone out of his world. "Poirot," I murmured, "have you noticed Harwell's behavior around Lady Margaret? There's something obsessive about it." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Indeed, mon ami, the secretary harbors feelings most inappropriate for his station. Such passion, when unrequited, can turn to dangerous obsession." He smiled faintly, "A rare indulgence. Your heart is ever generous, Hastings, but the mind must remain unswayed until all is clear." In the kitchen, Mrs. Ellen Cook greeted us with her usual flurry, her hands busy with a rolling pin. Poirot's questions about Hannah's disappearance drew a torrent of words from her cheerful lips. "Oh, sir, Hannah was in a right state before she vanished," she said, flowered, dusting her apron, terrified. "She was kept clutching a little charm, she called it, saying it would keep her safe from harm. Last I saw her, she was off to Miss Clara's room after dinner yesterday evening, muttering about a headache. Poor girl wouldn't say what frightened her so, but it was something dreadful. Mark my words." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A charm, Madam Cook, did she say whence it came?" "No, sir, not a word. Just held it tight and muttered prayers, then poof, gone." By morning this new tidbit deepened the mystery, and I saw Poirot's mind turn it over like a gem under scrutiny. "A charm," he murmured almost to himself. "Superstition often cloaks fear of the tangible, perhaps. This charm is not mere fancy. It may be a clue to what or who frightened her into flight." We thanked Mrs. Cook and moved to the library, where the port glass awaited Pooh's inspection, with Dr. Thompson, summoned to assist. Poirot examined the residue, within applying a reagent that turned a telltale hue. "Arsenic," he pronounced, his voice grave. "The method is certain, Hastings. Now we must find the hand that wielded it." By midday the sun had climbed high, casting a warm glow over the estate, yet the air remained thick with unanswered questions. I found myself reflecting on our suspects as we took a brief respite. Lady Margaret's evasiveness gnawed at me, as did Mr. Harwell's nervous tics. Yet Miss Clara's quiet honesty shone like a beacon. I was convinced of her innocence, though I knew Poirot would not share such sentiment. Without proof at luncheon, I observed the household, and knew Lady Margaret's eyes darted to Mr. Vane, who bore a strained civility, while Mr. Harwell fidgeted with his napkin. Miss Clara, serene amidst the tension, conversed softly with Mrs. Cook. Poirot beside me murmured, "See Hastings. How they betray themselves." The little glances, the restless hands. Later, as we retired to the library, I ventured, "Poirot, have you any theories?" Yet he leaned back, eyes half closed, the picture of a man at ease, yet wholly alert. "Theories, mon ami, I have many, but the puzzle lacks its final pieces, the little gray cells. They work, they align the fragments." "And what of Hannah's disappearance?" I pressed. He straightened, resolute. "This afternoon, Hastings, we shall visit the nearby village. This charm of Hannah's it may hold the key." I nodded, eager for the next step. As the clock struck 2, we prepared to set forth, the threads of the Ravenswood mystery drawing tighter, guided by Poirot's unerring mind. A village tragedy. By mid-afternoon, the autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the countryside as Poirot and I set forth from Ravenswood Hall. Our destination was the nearby village of Little Havesham. A lead on Hannah's disappearance, having pricked Poirot's curiosity into action. The gravel path crunched beneath our boots, and the mist that lingered among the hedge seemed to mirror the fog of mystery enveloping us. Hannah, that superstitious young maid, had vanished without a trace, and I felt a growing dread that her fate might illuminate the dark corners of Sir Henry's murder. Poirot, as ever, was a picture of composure, his small figure clad in an immaculate overcoat, his mustache waxed to perfection. "Little Havesham," he remarked, his voice cutting through the stillness. "A name so charming, yet it may conceal a tragedy most profound. We must be vigilant, Hastings. The villagers, they will guard their secrets jealously." I murmured my assent, my thoughts already leaping ahead to what we might uncover. The drive to the village was brief, the motor car winding through lanes flanked by golden fields, until Little Havesham emerged, a humble cluster of thatched cottages nestled beneath the watchful boughs of ancient oaks. Yet there was a stillness here that felt unnatural, attention hanging in the air like the tolling of a distant bell. Our first stop was the village, in a weathered establishment with a sagging roof and a sign proclaiming it the Black Swan. The innkeeper, a burly fellow with a fit face and a weary eye, greeted us with a nod. As we entered the dim tap-room, Poirot, with his customary flourish, removed his hat and addressed the man. "Bonjour, monsieur. We seek information regarding a young woman, Hannah, a maid from Ravenswood Hall. She has disappeared, and we believe she may have come this way." The innkeeper rubbed his chin, then turned to a pair of patrons nursing pints at a nearby table. "Oh, lads, you seen that lass from the Hall, Hannah?" Her name was one of the men, a grizzled farmer, with a pipe clenched between his teeth, nodded slowly. "2 nights back I saw her heading toward the old miller's cottage out by the wood. Queer place that'd been empty for years. No one's seen her since, and it's been quiet as a tomb." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark. "The old miller's cottage, you say? Could you kindly direct us there?" The farmer pointed us down a rude path that veered from the village's edge, and we set off at once, the air growing cooler. As we left the cottages, behind the cottage soon loomed into view a dilapidated Velets. Stone walls choked with ivy, its windows dark and uninviting. The door hung ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze, and I felt a chill that owed nothing to the weather. Poirot raised a hand to halt me as we neared the threshold. "Doucement, mon ami," he cautioned. "We must preserve what lies within. This may be a scene of great significance." I followed him. Inside, my pulse quickening. The interior was a study in neglect. Dust coated every surface, and the air was heavy with the musty scent of abandonment. Yet beneath it lingered something else, a faint bitter tang that set my nerves on edge. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw her, Hannah, sprawled upon a threadbare rug, her pale face frozen in an expression of eternal repose. Poirot knelt beside her, his movements precise. As he examined her still form, poisoned, he murmured, his voice a whisper in the stillness, "Regard, Hastings." The faint blue about her lips, the scent of almonds, arsenic. Once again, as with Sir Henry, a wave of horror washed over me. "Good Lord, Poirot, why? Hannah, what could she have known to merit this?" Poirot's gaze swept the room, alighting upon a crumpled paper clutched in her lifeless hand. With delicate care, he extracted it and unfolded it, his brow furrowing. As he read a letter, he said, his tone laced with contempt, "Supposedly for Mr. Charles Vane, confessing to Sir Henry's murder and imploring Hannah to meet him here to discuss their future. But observe, Hastings, the script is uneven, the hand uncertain. It is a forgery, and not a clever one." I leaned closer noting the shaky lines and hesitant strokes. So someone meant to pin this on Vane. Précy replied, his voice grim, and I suspect that Mr. Edward Harwell may be involved in this affair. Consider Hastings' agitation during the inquest, his presence near Miss Clarar's room on the night of the murder, and now this clumsy attempt to shift blame. The threads they begin to converge. I bristled at once. But Miss Clara, she could not be part of such a vile plot. I'd stake my honor on it. Hero's lips curved into a faint smile, a rare softening of his stern demeanor. Your chivalry does you credit, Manami. I too believe Miss Clara is not our culprit. It is Harwell who must be watched. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, we returned to Ravenswood Hall. The weight of Hannah's death pressing upon us, the journey back was a silent one. As I grappled with the image of her lifeless form upon our arrival, Poirot called for the household staff to assemble in the drawing room, his expression grave. I watched as they filed, in their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Mademoiselle Poirot began, his voice steady, I regret to inform you that Hannah, the lady's maid, has been found dead in Little Havesham. She was poisoned, much like Sir Henry. A collective gasp rippled through the room, and I noted Mr. Harwell's pallor deepen, his hands clenching at his sides. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flickered to him for a moment before continuing. Her death is a tragedy, and it is imperative that we uncover the truth. If any of you have information, however small, I urge you to come forward. The staff murmured among themselves, their shock palpable, but none spoke. Poirot dismissed them with a nod, his gaze lingering on Harwell as he retreated with the others. Later in the library, Poirot turned to me, his tone thoughtful. Observe, Hastings, how Harwell's composure falters. His fear, it is a crack in the facade. We must apply pressure, but with care. I couldn't resist voicing my doubts. Poirot, do you truly think Harwell capable of such cold calculation? He seems a wreck, not a mastermind. Poirot's expression was pensive. Fear, Hastings, can make a man both reckless and ruthless. Harwell hides something. I feel it in my little gray cells. The day drew to a close, with the mystery thickening like the dusk outside. Yet a flicker of hope stirred within me. Poirot's mind was a beacon illuminating the shadows, and I sensed the killer's scheme beginning to fray at the edges. As we retired for the night, the image of Hannah lingered, a silent spur to our resolve. Justice, I felt certain, was drawing near. The bait is set. The morning sun had scarcely breached the mist-laden gardens of Ravenswood Hall when I found myself once more in the company of Hercule Poirot, whose brisk step and gleaming eyes bespoke a mind of fire. With purpose, the events of the prior days, Sir Henry's poisoning, Hannah's tragic end in Little Havesham, had cast a pall over the manor. Yet this day I sensed would mark a turning point. We stood in the drawing room, its velvet and bronze a stark contrast to the tension that gripped us as Poirot outlined his latest stratagem. Hastings, he began, his voice low and conspiratorial. Today we lay a snare for our quarry. The murderer believes their web of deceit unassailable, but we shall use their own cunning against them. I turned to him, my interest piqued to snare Poirot. Do tell, he smiled, that familiar spark of mischief in his gaze. We shall orchestrate the arrest of Mr. Charles Vane. Monami, inspector, will arrive to take him into custody, citing the forged letter and other evidence. But it is not Vane we seek. It is the true culprit's reaction when they see their frame-up succeed. They will lower their guard, and their Hastings we shall strike. I marveled at the elegance of it, a ruse so simple, yet so deftly woven. And you're certain this will unmask the killer? Precisamente, he replied, his tone resolute. The guilty one has labored to cast suspicion upon Vane. When their plan appears to bear fruit, they will grow complacent, and in that moment we shall see. Scarcely had he finished when the rumble of a motor car announced Japsa's arrival. Through the window I glimpsed his sturdy figure, light, flanked by two constables, whose stern faces promised action. Poirot gave me a nod, and we hastened to the hall where the household was assembling. Drawn by the sound, strode in his voice, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Mr. Charles Vane, he declared, I am placing you under arrest for the murders of Sir Henry Ashwood and Hannah, the ladies made. The evidence, the letter found with Hannah, among other proofs, points directly to you. A ripple of shock swept the room. Lady Margaret's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with dismay, while Miss Clarar's gaze sharpened, as though peering through a veil. Vane, pale but composed, rose to his feet. This is absurd, he protested, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I am innocent of these crimes. Remained unmoved. You'll have your say at the station, sir. For now you're coming with us. The constable stepped forward, and Vane, with a resigned bow, allowed himself to be led away. As the door closed behind them, I stole a glance at Mr. Edward Harwell, who lingered near the fireplace. His usual nervous fidgeting had ceased. His hands rested calmly at his sides, and a faint smug curve touched his lips. Poirot, ever watchful, followed my gaze, his eyes narrowing. With the intensity of a predator, there Hastings, he whispered. Do you see? Harwell eases, perhaps believing his scheme has triumphed. He may be our fish, Hastings, and the bait is set. I nodded, struck anew by Poirot's insight. What's our next move? We wait, mon ami, he murmured. The trap is sprung now. We observed. The afternoon crept on the manor, hushed beneath the weight of Vane's arrest. I found Lady Margaret in the conservatory, her pale face framed by the misty glass. As she stared into the gardens, Poirot approached with a gentleness I knew masked his purpose. Madam, he said softly, I must ask about your past with Mr. Vane. The letters we found, they speak of a bond deeper than friendship. The dates on these letters, madam, they are more recent than you previously claimed. They speak of meetings, of stolen moments. Was this truly before your marriage, or did it persist? Her shoulders stiffened, but she did not turn. It was a lapse, Mr. Poirot, she admitted, her voice taut. A brief affair a couple of years ago while I was married to Henry, but it ended long before his death. I swear it. Poirot's tone remained even. And yet you kept the letters, madam. Why? A sigh escaped her. A foolish whim, perhaps a memory of a time when I felt alive, but it has no bearing on Henry's death. Before Poirot could probe further, the door burst open, and Miss Clara stormed at, her eyes alight with fury. A moment of weakness. Margaret, I saw you with Vane whispering in the garden mere days before Henry died. Do you take us all for fools? Lady Margaret spun to face her composure. Fracturing. Clara, you're mistaken. It was about the estate, nothing more. Lies. Miss Clara shot back, her voice ringing with accusation. You think I don't see? Margaret, you feared Henry would change his will leave you nothing. Henry was a good man, Margaret, better than you deserved with your faithlessness. He only tolerated me because I'm your cousin, but you've dishonored him. Poirot, his eyes narrowing, stepped back, observing the exchange with keen interest. As the two women's voices clashed, he leaned toward me, his voice a low murmur. Curious, Hastings, is it not? Why would Sir Henry consider altering his will to favor Miss Clara? The unfinished letter, we found it spoke of amending certain arrangements, and named her explicitly. Perhaps Sir Henry saw in Miss Clara a steadfastness, a loyalty to Lady Margaret, that he wished to reward, or maybe he recognized her intelligence and thought her better suited to manage the estate's affairs. And yet, Hastings, could there be more? If Sir Henry knew of his wife's infidelity, might he have developed a fondness for Miss Clara, a woman who, unlike Lady Margaret, remained true? It is a question we must ponder, for it may hold the key to the murderer's motive. The air crackled with their clash, and I feared it might escalate beyond reason, but Poirot stepped between them, his hands raised in a gesture of calm authority. Madame Silvu, play, he said, his voice a soothing balm. This is not the hour for discord. We seek the truth, and anger will not hasten it. Miss Clara's breath heaved, but she subsided. Her gaze, dropping Lady Margaret, sank into a chair, tears glistening in her eyes. Poirot turned to her, his tone softening. Madam, if there's more to tell, now is the time. She shook her head, whispering, There's nothing, Mr. Poirot. Despite my failings, I loved Henry. I would never harm him. He studied her a moment, then inclined his head. Very well, we leave it there for now. As we left the conservatory, I couldn't help but admire Pooh's finesse. You have a gift, Poirot, I said, easing tempests while chasing truth. He chuckled softly. A delicate art, Hastings, the truth it hides. Like a timid bird, coax it, never force it. Evening approached, the sky deepening to a somber purple. The manor thrummed with an unspoken anticipation, as though sensing the climax. Near Poirot's ruse had set the stage, and I felt the threads of the mystery tightening. As we retired, I carried a certainty that the end was nigh, guided by Poirot's unerring little gray cells. The library revelation. As the afternoon waned, the golden light filtering through the windows, the library of Ravenswood Hall stood as a silent witness to the drama that unfolded within its walls. Its towering bookshelves loomed like sentinels, their volumes whispering secrets of ages past, while the grand oak desk, polished to a gleam, bore the weight of a mystery soon to be laid bare. The air was heavy, not with the scent of old paper, but with a tension that seemed to coil about us all, tightening with every tick of the mantel clock. I stood near the door, my pulse quickening as Hercule took his place before the assembled household, his diminutive figure radiating an authority that belied his stature. Inspector, a stern bulwark of justice, flanked the exits, with 2 constables, their presence a mute assurance that no one would slip away until the truth was spoken. The household sat in a semicircle of unease, Lady Margaret pale and regal, her hands clasped tightly, Miss Clara Beaumont, her sharp eyes watchful, Mr. Edward Harwell rigid as a statue, his fingers betraying a faint tremble, Thomas Grayson, the butler, with his pompous air slightly dimmed, and the rest a chorus of anxious faces, awaiting Poirot's verdict. Poirot's voice, when it came, was a velvet thread woven with steel. Madame Zéger, he began, summoned you here to unveil the truth behind the deaths of Sir Henry Ashwood and Hannah, the ladies' maid. The murderer sits among us, their cunning unraveled by the little gray cells. But before I proceed, I must address a matter of importance. The arrest of Mr. Charles Vane was no mere blunder by the police. It was a play, a stratagem devised by myself and Inspector to confirm the identity of the true culprit. We watched, we waited, and in the calm that followed, the guilty one revealed themselves through their misplaced confidence. Inspector has returned not for Vane, but to seize the real killer this day. Now I shall clear the innocent from suspicion, for justice demands precision. He turned to Lady Margaret, whose beauty seemed fragile beneath her strain. Madam, you stood to gain Sir Henry's fortune, a motive but opportunity eluded you. You were not near the library when the port was poured, nor did you possess the arsenic. At that moment your grief is real, if shadowed by secrets. You are not the killer. A sigh escaped her, and her shoulders eased, though her eyes remained haunted. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Clara, who met it with her customary calm. Mademoiselle Clara, the handkerchief with your initials near the body cast a shadow upon you, and Mr. Harwell noted your door ajar that night, yet the staff confirm your presence in your room, and your motive speculation about the will lacks substance. You, too, are innocent. Miss Clara inclined her head, a flicker of relief softening her features. Poirot gestured to an empty chair, as if Mr. Charles Vane sat there still. Ms. Vane, though absent, must be absolved. Travel records prove he was not at Ravenswood that night. The forged letter found with Hannah was a crude attempt to ensnare him, its flaws too evident to deceive. The room held its breath as Poirot's eyes settled on Mr. Edward Harwell, whose pallor deepened under that piercing scrutiny. Thus we arrive at the guilty one, Mr. Edward Harwell. A gasp broke from Lady Margaret, and Miss Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Harwell's lips parted, a protest forming, but Poirot pressed on, relentless. We, Miss Harwell, it was you who poisoned Sir Henry, and Hannah the motive and obsessive love for Lady Margaret, poisoned by jealousy of her past with Mr. Charles Vane and dread that Sir Henry might alter his will. You sought to secure her future and to destroy a rival more than that. You harbored a delusion, a fantasy born of your own, making that with Sir Henry gone you could seduce Lady Margaret when her heart, where no spark of romance had ever existed between you. You saw yourself as her rescuer, her knight, blinded by a passion she never returned. Harwell's voice rasped, preposterous. I deny it utterly. Silence. Poirot's tone was a whip. Crack. The evidence speaks, where you will not consider Sir Henry's death a tapestry of cunning woven with meticulous care. You had observed the household's habits, noting the arsenic kept in the gardener's shed for pests, a poison easily overlooked. Days before you pilored a small quantity, concealing it in a vial within your coat. That night, when Sir Henry requested port, you saw your chance, offering to pour, a gesture so casually accepted, yet so calculated. You stood at the sideboard, your back to the room, and with the deftness of a conjurer, you slipped the arsenic into his glass alone, the others untouched. As he drank, and the poison seized him, you lingered, feigning concern until he collapsed. Then, with the calm of a predator, you retrieved the spare key from the hall cupboard, a key you knew was there from your years at Ravenswood, stepped outside, locked the door from without, and returned the key to the vase by the hearth, knowing Grayson would eventually find it there, making the locked room mystery even more puzzling. But in your moment of panic, you carelessly thought that by hiding the spare key in the vase you would throw people off and make them believe that the room was locked from inside. It was a fatal miscalculation, for why would a spare key be moved at all if the room was truly sealed from within? This very displacement betrayed your deception, a locked room, a perfect illusion designed to confound us all. But the mind of Hercule sees through such artifices. I watched Harwell's hands clench, his denial crumbling, as Poirot continued, then there is Hannah, whose fate reveals your ruthlessness. She saw you tamper with the port, her keen eyes caught the flicker of your hand, and you knew she could not be trusted to stay silent. You devised a plan of chilling precision. First, you forged a letter in Vane's hand, studying his script from old correspondence, a romantic note that lured her to the old miller's cottage, promising a secret meeting under the guise of love. But you prepared a second forgery, as well, a false confession in Vane's hand admitting to Sir Henry's murder. When Hannah arrived at the cottage, expecting her lover, she found you instead there, alone and isolated. You overpowered the frightened girl and forced the arsenic down her throat. No gentle deception this time, but brute violence. Then you placed a forged confession in her lifeless hands, creating the perfect tableau, a murdered witness clutching evidence that would frame your rival for both crimes. A second murder executed with the cold brilliance of a master schemer. The room was a tableau of shock. Lady Margaret's soft sob the only sound. Harwell's defiance faltered, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. No, I didn't. Enough. Poirot's voice thundered. The forged letter, the arsenic in the port, the hidden key, all point to you. Your attempt to frame Vane was vengeance, but the handwriting betrayed you, its inconsistencies, a fatal flaw. Harwell slumped, his voice breaking as despair overtook him. I loved her, Margaret. I thought if Henry were gone you'd turn to me. Vane, he didn't deserve you. I wanted him to suffer as I did. Hannah, she saw too much. I had no choice. The confession hung in the air, a bitter shroud. Lady Margaret's tears fell freely, while Miss Clara's face was a mask of horror. Poirot's gaze softened briefly, a flicker of pity, before he turned to Inspector, stepped forward, his tone gruff. Edward Harwell, you're under arrest for the murders of Sir Henry Ashwood and Hannah. As the constables advanced, Harwell lunged for the door in a desperate bid for freedom, but Japp's men were swift, pinning him with practiced ease. As Harwell was led away, the library seemed to breathe again, the tension ebbing like a receding tide. I turned to Poirot, my voice low. It's done, then, we, mon ami, he replied, his eyes distant. Justice is served, though the heart bears its scars. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Ravenswood Hall in twilight, I reflected on the day's grim unmasking. Poirot and I prepared to depart, but not before witnessing the fragile stirrings of renewal. Lady Margaret and Miss Clara, though shaken by Harwell's betrayal, clasped hands in silent solidarity, their bond a tentative light amid the shadows of that fateful day. A new beginning. The twilight had settled over Ravenswood Hall, like a soft veil, the last vestiges of the sun's warmth giving way to the cool embrace of evening. The manor, which had so recently been a stage for tragedy and deceit, now seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, its ivy-clad walls and tall windows bathed in the gentle glow of dusk. The tension that had gripped the household for days had finally ebbed, leaving in its wake a fragile peace, a peace hard won, but peace nonetheless. I stood by the drawing-room window, gazing out at the gardens where the mist was beginning to rise, curling around the hedges like a ghostly shroud. Behind me the room was quiet, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the velvet curtains and the grand piano that stood mute in the corner. It was here, in this room, that the first whispers of suspicion had begun, and now, as the day drew to a close, it was here that the final threads of the mystery were being woven into resolution. Poirot, ever the orchestrator of such moments, had retired to the library to pen his final notes, leaving me to observe the quiet reconciliation unfolding before me. Lady Margaret and Miss Clara Beaumont sat together on the settee, their hands clasped in a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. The strain that had once marred their relationship had softened, replaced by a tentative warmth, rekindling of the familial bond that had been tested by suspicion and grief. Clara, Lady Margaret said softly, her voice still tinged with the weight of recent events, I cannot express how deeply I regret the rift that grew between us. I was blinded by my own fears, my own failings. But now, with the truth laid bare, I see how unjust I was to doubt you. Miss Clara's sharp eyes, usually so guarded, softened as she regarded her cousin Margaret. We have both borne our share of sorrow. Henry's death, the accusations. It has been a trial for us all, but I never doubted your heart, only your judgment in moments of weakness. Let us put the past behind us and rebuild what was lost. Lady Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I should like that very much, and to that end I have made a decision. Henry's fortune is mine now, but I cannot in good conscience keep it all. I wish to share it with you, Clara. You have been my steadfast companion, and I owe you more than I can repay. Miss Clara shook her head gently, her voice firm. Yet, kind Margaret, your generosity does you credit, but I cannot accept. The inheritance is yours by right, and I have no need of it. If you truly wish to honor Henry's memory, perhaps we might consider donating a portion to charity, a cause he held dear. It would be a fitting tribute, and a way to heal the wounds this house has suffered." Lady Margaret's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. "You are right, Clara. Henry always spoke of helping those less fortunate. It would be a noble gesture, and one that might bring some good from this tragedy." As they spoke, I felt a stirring of admiration for both women. Their resilience in the face of such upheaval was a testament to their strength, and their willingness to forgive and rebuild was a beacon of hope amidst the shadows that had lingered over Ravenswood Hall. The door to the drawing-room opened quietly, and Mr. Charles Vane entered, his expression one of quiet resolve. He had been released from custody earlier that day, the charges against him dismissed in light of Harwell's confession, yet there was a solemnity about him, a recognition of the delicate path he now trod. "Lady Margaret," he said, his voice measured, "might I have a word?" She rose gracefully, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Vane." He stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "I must first apologize for any distress my presence has caused. My feelings for you, though sincere, were ill-timed and improper. Given your marriage to Sir Henry, I allowed my admiration to cloud my judgment, and for that I am deeply sorry." Lady Margaret's cheeks flushed faintly, but she held his gaze. "Mr. Vane, you have always been a gentleman, and I cannot fault you for your sentiments, but you are right. Our past must remain where it belongs. Henry is gone, and I must honor his memory by living with dignity." Vane inclined his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "You are as wise as you are gracious, Lady Margaret. I shall trouble you no further. Know only that I wish you nothing but happiness in the days to come. Perhaps in time, when the shadow of this tragedy has lifted, we might find a way to be friends again," he added softly, his eyes searching hers. Lady Margaret's cheeks flushed faintly, but she held his gaze. "Time heals many wounds, Mr. Vane. We shall see what the future holds," she replied, her voice steady yet tinged with a hint of possibility. With a courteous bow, he withdrew, leaving the room with the same quiet dignity with which he had entered. I watched him go, struck by the grace with which he had stepped aside, his honor intact despite the turmoil that had surrounded him. Poirot emerged from the library, his task complete, and joined me by the window. "It is done, Hastings," he said, his voice a low murmur. "With Inspector and his men having taken Harwell into custody, the wheels of justice are already in motion. It is a grim business, but the truth has prevailed." I nodded, my thoughts turning to the man who had so cunningly woven a web of deceit, only to be snared by his own obsession. "It's a grim business, Poirot. To think that love could drive a man to such madness." Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, softened with a rare melancholy. "Amanomi, love is a force both wondrous and terrible. It can lift the soul to the heavens or cast it into the abyss. In Harwell's case, it was a poison more deadly than the arsenic he wielded. Such is the complexity of human nature, ever a puzzle even to one such as I." Pondered his words, the weight of the case settling upon me like a shroud. The emotional toll had been heavy, not just for the inhabitants of Ravenswood Hall, but for myself as well. I had seen the fragility of trust, the ruin of obsession, and the quiet strength of those who endured. It was a reminder of the delicate balance upon which our lives teeter, and the shadows that lurk within even the most orderly of hearts. As the evening deepened, the manor seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The gaslights flickered to life, casting a warm glow upon the halls, and the scent of Mrs. Cook's cooking wafted from the kitchen, a promise of normally returning. Poirot and I took our leave, our duty done, but not without a final glance at the drawing-room where Lady Margaret and Miss Clara sat in quiet conversation, their bond mended, their future uncertain yet hopeful. As we stepped into the cool night air, the stars beginning to pierce the velvet sky, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Ravenswood Hall, for all its grandeur and tragedy, had found its way back to the light, and as Poirot and I departed, I knew that in time the scars would heal and life would bloom anew within its walls. As twilight settles over Ravenswood Hall, Hercule Poirot's brilliance cuts through a tapestry of deceit. The murderer ends snared by their own obsession, a twisted love warped by jealousy stands revealed, their cunning undone by the little gray cells. 2 lives lost, yet justice prevails, leaving the manor to heal its wounds in fragile peace. We hope this tale has enthralled you, dear listeners. Did you unravel the locked room puzzle before Pooh's final revelation? Or did the shadows of St. Marry Me confound you? Tell us below. If the Ravenswood mystery has captivated you, please like and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for more. Stories of intrigue support our craft with a tip via Super Thanks by joining our membership or visiting our Buy Me a Coffee page link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until our next adventure, may your nights brim with wonder and your days with clarity.